This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a renowned director, producer, screenwriter, and author whose body of work includes over 200 feature films in many genres, including horror, sci-fi, action, adventure, erotic thrillers, crime dramas, rom-coms, and holiday films. Some of his most popular movies are Scalps, The Tomb, Terminal Force, Beverly Hills Vamp, Haunting Fear, Evil Toons, The Shooter, Deadly Shores, Stage Fright, to name only a few. And I have to mention the brilliant short film Spidora, for which he won 4 prestigious film festival awards. He's worked with everyone from Buster Crabbe, Roddy McDowall, Cliff Robertson, John and David Carradine, and Martin Landau, Chevy Chase, George Hamilton, Peter Fonda, Stella Stevens, Troy Donahue, Russ Tamblyn, Steven Segal, and many, many more. Our guest has also produced and directed dozens of Christmas movies, including some of my favorites, A Prince for Christmas, A Christmas in Vermont, One Fine Christmas, and A Royal Christmas Holiday. On television, he produced Dante's Cove. He wrote, produced, and directed 28 episodes of The Lair, and he won an Emmy Award and received 2 more Emmy nominations for his work on The Bay. In addition, our guest has written 5 books: Grind Show, Weirdness as Entertainment, The New Poverty Row, Independent Filmmakers as Distributors, Writing the Perfect Christmas TV Movie, Deep Red, and his latest release, a fascinating, uninhibited, and insightful memoir entitled Hell Bent for Hollywood, A Director's Journey, in which he takes us on his colorful and sometimes turbulent journey from fringe, low-budget filmmaking to a long-running successful career as a highly respected writer, producer, and director. I'm delighted to welcome the one and only Olen Ray to our show. Fred, thank you so much for being here.
Harvey, thank you for having me. Listening to all that, I was wondering if you were actually talking about me.
I was indeed. Now, Fred, as a kid in the 60s, you were a big fan of monster movies, and you said in your book that because you were a monster kid, you were treated like an outsider and you never quite fit in, and you said you don't think you ever wanted to fit in. Do you still feel that way even as an adult?
I think I straddled two different worlds, because there was the kind of kid that I was, which was the kid that wasn't interested in hot rods and stuff like that, and I gravitated toward the model kits of the Wolfman and Frankenstein. But then there was that one part of me that was unlike those kids, which was the kid that was on the wrestling team, the kid that played football and used to like to knock it around, which is something that I didn't find in the world of kids that stayed up and watched shock theater. And as I grew up, I found that a lot of those monster kids were not very physical kids. That replaced all of that for them. But I kind of straddled those 2 worlds, because for whatever reason, I grew up as I was a professional wrestler also, and a football player and amateur wrestler. And so I kind of mixed it up, but I definitely was never interested in the surfer scene and the hot rod scene and stuff like that. And I never felt comfortable. I never felt comfortable in that. And we were talking about this the other day, and that when I was like 10 years old and stuff, I could name off books and authors and poets and stuff no 10-year-old or 11-year-old should ever be able to do. It must have creeped my parents out, because I probably seemed extremely abnormal to my folks, that I could name off these authors and stuff that my parents, who never read a book probably in their whole life, they probably unnerved them a little bit.
You lived in LA for 40 years, but you said you never felt like you belonged there. Why?
I moved back to Florida after after such a long time. And I kind of grew up in a certain area, in a certain mindset. And I mean, I grew tremendously once I got to Los Angeles, because I saw things I'd never seen before. My brother and I drove out there together. And once we got to LA, we saw things we'd never seen before. And, you know, I had to change and I had to grow. And I did. And my perception of things changed a lot. But, you know, there was no sense of community there. There was no, you know, I grew up early in my life in the West Virginia, Ohio, you know, border territory, which my family had been in for 200 and some odd years. And I grew up in little neighborhoods in Sarasota, Florida. And there was no sense of community there. I felt alienated the whole time that I was in Los Angeles. And the minute I got back to Florida, I would go out in the backyard and I could smell, you know, where somebody had mowed their grass and the sun was kind of hot and there was a ditch with some water in it. And it felt like I was a kid again. And I don't regret it. I don't regret moving back here for a minute.
You're often referred to as the king of low budget films, and you said that you've always been interested in stories that can be told with little or no money. Why do you find that so appealing?
Because you have to have a story. You can't hide behind money. You can't hide behind flash and big CGI, you know, explosions and people running down the street and CGI cars flipping up and the water hydrants exploding, you know, around you. And you can't go on for 15, 20 minutes with that going on all around you. And I go, you know, if you look at something like Sniper, I got a telephone call and they said, you know, we want to do a movie with Steven Seagal. I said, what's it about? They said, well, we don't know, but we have him for 2 days. But he needs to be through the movie. And I said, well, let's face it. I said, it has to be about something. I said, you can't just have a gunfight for 90 minutes. It's not going to work. It has to be about something. And this is what I try to tell people. You know, in between this, I said, I'll give you something big at the beginning. I'll give you something big in the middle, and I'll give you something big at the end. I said, but in between here, this has to be a story about something. It has to be about something. And so, you know, I would go at that point, I went back and I looked at a Roger Corman movie called Battle of Blood Island. And it was about two guys who were left alive on an island in the Pacific after a big battle that happened during the credit sequence. Well, there were two guys. One guy was Jewish, played by Richard Devon. And the other guy had been paralyzed from the waist down by a bullet in his spine. This guy, the other guy, had to look after this paralyzed guy while they were hoping that someone would come and find them. And it was about their struggles. And I looked at some combat with Vic Morrow. I looked at some combat episodes because that was a show that had to tell a combat story of World War II every week in 60 minutes, and they didn't have a budget. So the story had to be about guys in combat, but it had to be about something. And I saw an episode where a truck had broken down and they had to go find this truck that was broken down and save these guys who had run out of fuel. So I took those two stories and I went, I can do something with this. And I did, and I expanded upon that and wiggled around and all that stuff. And I came up with Sniper, where Steven Seagal was stuck in a town after a big firefight and his spotter had taken a bullet to the spine and become paralyzed, and Seagal was left behind. And the guys couldn't get permission to go back and rescue him, but they were sent on a mission to rescue a truck that had all the ammunition that this outpost needed, but had broken down. And I said, this is what this story is going to be about. But of course, it became much more complicated. But you have to have a plot. And to me, if you're given 10 days, you're given 10 days to make a movie, or 6 days, or 8 days, in which I find myself in. And even at then, though, this is a movie that's way over $1 million, but you've got all these limitations. I said, well, you've got to have a plot that involves people. It grabs them and pulls them in, and you've got to keep it interesting. You've got to keep it moving. You have to have a story. You just can't keep throwing gunfire at people and them running around. It has to be about something. And that's the first thing that I'm looking for, is how do you tell a story with a camera?
Well,
And
you
people,
actually said in your book that having nothing gave you everything. That really says it all, doesn't it?
and I really believe that. I really believe that's true, because if you don't have a plot or a story or characters that people are interested in, they're going to get bored with the gunfire and the explosions. And it's just like that. That's what an Italian, no offense, but that's what the Italians or a Filipino action picture is. It's throwing people, gunfire and explosions with no substance. A Cirio Santiago movie, God bless him. But that's what those Road Warrior ripoffs and those kind of things that the Italians would do. And I know, because I worked on some of those things. And they make a flashy trailer, and at their time they sold. But you have to be able to engage the audience. I really believe that, and I'm all about that. And people said during The Lair, if you're familiar with The Lair, I did all 3 seasons of The Lair. I created that series. I wrote every episode. I produced and directed every episode. And people would come up and say, "Well, how can you do this?" And I said, "I am telling a story with a camera. That's my job. My job is to tell a story with a camera."
You certainly do it very, very well. It's clear from your book that you were not drawn to the big movie studios like so many other directors were. Is that because you preferred being independent?
No, I don't. I don't think so. I mean, in my early days, I mean, I daydreamed of having my name on one of those concrete things at the front of the parking spot. I mean, I was. I'm not actually sure of your audience, but if you know who Herman Cohen was, Herman Cohen was a producer who made horror films in the 50s and stuff. But later in the late 60s, he hooked up with Joan Crawford, and he made movies like Trog and, oh, I don't know what the films was that he did, but he did like Circus of Horrors or whatever. But he was enamored with Joan Crawford, and he made all these Joan Crawford movies. But he had an office right next to me at Raleigh Studios, in the old Raleigh Studios, at Chaplin, Pickford, whatever you want to call them. Now it was called Producer Studios, but right next door to me, where I shared an office with George Edwards, who'd made, oh, I don't know, Harbor Valley PTA and Chattanooga Choo Choo with Barbara Eden. I shared an office with this older producer, but right next to me was Herman Cohen. And he had a parking spot right in front, and he had a concrete thing, and he had his name on it. And I was a young kid, so I couldn't get a spot on the lot at all. I had to park off the lot, and I had to walk through the gate every morning. "Good morning, Mr. Ray." And I'm walking in. I mean, I'm on foot. And then I'd say, "Good morning," and give him the Christmas card and the whole bit. But I was always in awe of Herman Cohen, and I wanted to be a studio guy, and I wanted my name on a parking spot. And I dreamed of having a big, huge studio film, millions and millions of dollars lavished on the show. But it wasn't meant to be. I think because I made some decisions early, because, Harvey, before I moved to Hollywood, I got a phone call out of the blue one day, and it was my errant ex-wife, who had been missing for several years, who last I saw of her, she had a newborn baby, a son of mine, and a 2-year-old son of mine, and then she disappeared. I mean, literally, to the courts, to the law, to everybody. And I actually got a divorce by running a classified ad in a newspaper. I mean, you probably saw this in my book. But I got a phone call after I'd already given up my apartment. I was living on my mother's couch in preparation of making this drive to California. I got a phone call saying, "I'll give you your 4-year-old son. I won't give you the other one, but I'll give you your 4-year-old. If you'll meet me in this parking lot in Cocoa Beach, Florida, I'll hand him to you." And I went, great, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll take them both. And she said, no, I'll give you one. So out of the blue, I was handed a 4-year-old little boy who hadn't seen me since he was a baby, who didn't know me at all. And then taking this little boy and hitting the road to who knows what mystery lied ahead. As the years came up, I would take, and I was a single parent. When I tell people I was a single parent, I'm telling you, I was a single parent till that little boy literally hit 19 years of age. And I had no parenting skills. The one thing I did know is that I had to take whatever came along. And I think I made some decisions along the road that, as a career person wishing they could be a studio person, I probably made some decisions and took some films and did some films and stuff that, as a person who desired to be a studio person, I probably shouldn't have done them, but I did them. I don't regret them, but I think I forfeited my name on the parking spot along the way.
Yeah,
And
but you were a good father. You did the right thing. And I think that's only something that people can admire you for. Now, in the late 80s, you started your own production company, American Independent Productions. And you wrote in your book that the freedom of being your own boss is not always a good thing. What did you mean by that?
well, initially I did it on the advice of my attorney to better control my income taxes, and so that I could separate out things that were business related from my personal taxes, because there obviously, if you have a company, things that are business related there are deductions and things of that nature. But what I found was, when I grew up, I didn't have any money. I was always, my mom kind of ran off before I got out of high school, and then my father didn't want us around, so I got the boot early, which is how I ended up with Doug Hobart, taking over the reins of managing me as kind of my dad. But I never had any money, so I didn't know what to do with money. So once I started making money, I would make $12,000 gross standing at a factory machine. And then all of a sudden I made the tomb and they paid me $15,000 for what was basically 12 days work. And once that happened a few times, I had like money in the bank, but I didn't know what to do with it. And so I ended up, after a year or so, I had money in the bank. And so I started financing my own films, because I could see what Trans World and these guys were doing and how they were making. The Tomb would make like $3.5 million, and it saved the company there after this movie called Creature, which was, I think, also called Titanfine, had kind of taken a bath when the company distributed it had gone bankrupt. And I said, well, I would like to have a piece of that, because I could see they were all making money. So I started investing in my own films and owning my own movies. What I didn't realize is it would take 2 years or more to get that money back. So what I found is I was putting all this money of my own into these films, but then I was having to wait years to kind of get it back. And then I was putting these things ahead of actually making films that I was getting a paycheck for. And so I went a couple years and I owned all these movies, but I didn't have any income. So I finally around 1990, I had to say, okay, I've got all this equity and stuff, but what I don't have is any kind of cash flow. And I had to finally say, listen, I'm not gonna work again until somebody offers me a paycheck. And that's when Inner Sanctum came along, and the whole world for me turned upside down again, and I was on the road up again.
Over the years, you've worked with some iconic directors like Ed Wood, John Derek, Russ Meyer, just to name a few. Who would you say are the directors that have influenced you the most in your career, Fred?
There are people who I'm very grateful to. Russ Meyer was a very interesting guy. And when I say I worked with Russ, I meant I carried his stuff for him. He was making a documentary about his life. it was already 3.5 hours long when I was working with Russ, and I was just a grunt. I mean, because I was so in awe of Russ, I was a nobody. My career hadn't started at that point. I was still like a factory kind of like worker ant. And I carried stuff for Russ and I helped Russ. And the funny thing was, you know, I tried when I first got to town to hook up with Dave Friedman, and Dave Friedman wouldn't take my phone call. And everything seemed to happen so fast for me. When at the time it was in slow motion. Everything was in slow motion, and I love to tell people this story. When I came here from Orlando, I had 2 jobs then. I worked in television, 4-day week, 10 hours a day, and I had 3 days off. So during the 3 days, I worked at a video lab that made dubs and stuff for other TV distributors and stuff there in Orlando. And I came out here thinking I would just go work for another TV station because I had a first-class FCC engineering license because I had an engineering degree from Brown. And I got out here and I realized that it was heavily unionized. And when I say here, I'm saying LA because I'm still in the LA mindset, but I meant Los Angeles. And I realized that guys were in their 70s and still hitting the slate because it was all unionized. These guys were never going to quit. So I found myself unemployed for the first time in my life, and I had a little 4-year-old child. So I found myself in the unemployment line, and it was unbelievable. And back then, you had to go actually stand in an unemployment line. And it was at Magnolia and Lankershim in Los Angeles. And I was down there standing in line, and it was a long line. It was the walk of shame. You had to stand there with your paper in your hand, and you had to stand there in line and you wait as they walk you through slowly. And I couldn't help but look over the shoulder of the guy in front of me because you're standing there a long time. And I could see his name on the application, and it was Wyatt Ordung. And I looked at it and I went, oh my God, the guy in front of me is Wyatt Ordung. You know, the guy who had directed Roger Corman's first movie, Monster from the Ocean Floor, the guy who'd written Robot Monster. And I went, oh my God, I'm in Hollywood. And Wyatt Ordung's in front of me in the unemployment line. And I thought, do I say something? Because I was like starstruck. And I went, you know what? That guy's probably as embarrassed to be in this line as I am. And I'm standing there with a 4-year-old child. I said, you know, maybe I better let this one go. And I did. And I never heard of Wyatt Ordung again. And I tell people, I said, you know what? That unemployment office at Magnolia and Lankershim was later torn down. And they built the Television Academy building there. The same Television Academy that would later give me this Emmy. I said, you know,
talk about karma. That's destiny.
That's something.
That is something. Now, you said in your book, Fred, that running a film set is like running a daycare center. How so?
Well, it's just so diverse and crazy and out of control at times. And, you know, you get so many things. I mean, I'm sure you've been to things where people will say, so-and-so, she won't come out of her trailer, or so-and-so's falling down drunk. And when I wrote my book, there were some people who I felt okay telling the truth about because they weren't with us any longer. And there's some people that I passed over. And I made sure that I ran my stuff through my lawyer because I said, listen, this is just my opinion, but I was there. And just the insane, crazy. I mean, I've had, you know, people come up and threaten to kill me, and you don't even know why. And you kind of go, oh, you know, and then you'll see them come back a day later, and you'll say to the producer, hey, that person can't be here. They threatened to kill me. And they'll say, well, can they work if they apologize to you in front of the crew? I said, yeah, but But why? Why did they threaten to kill me? Well, no one will ever know. And then you'll have, people who are falling down drunk or crazy, crazy stuff. You're barring people from sets, because you think they're supplying drugs to your leading lady. And, it's just, sometimes it's just, I had a kid who was from Russia who was saying misogynist things to the makeup girls, where you'd have to call the Screen Actors Guild, and then the agents would have to come down and pull the kid off the set and read him the riot act. I mean, it's just, sometimes it's just, you just don't know what to say.
Well, people really have no idea what goes on. Now, Quentin Tarantino refers to you as the Schlockmeister. How do you feel about that?
Considering what I did for that guy, he'll also tell you that I loaned him a camera so he could make his first movie. I don't know what to make of that. He certainly didn't say that when he came over to my house and borrowed my camera so he could make his first movie.
Well, I got to tell you, I don't see you as the Schlockmeister, and I'll tell you why. I think that a lot, if not all, of your movies contain a message, and that even a movie like Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers contains a message.
We've said that. And I defy anyone to disprove that. It's very true. That's actually very true.
Well, my producer asked me, what is the message of the Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers? And I said, well, when I watched it, the message I got was, be careful who you hook up with for sex because they might be a mass murderer. How's that?
Absolutely true. My brother and I, when we first got to Hollywood, we were such babes in the woods. I mean, we didn't know anybody. Who in their right mind? We'd never been west of the Mississippi River. I mean, who in their right mind would jump in a car with less than $1,000 to their name and drive to Los Angeles and think you had half a chance to do anything or be anything? But we did it. We did it with a 4-year-old. I mean, we must have been insane, but the laws were laxer back then, I think. But I mean, we walked down Hollywood Boulevard, and there were these newspaper boxes, and they were free papers, but all they were just a series of ads for escorts that would come over to your house. And my brother and I, we looked at these because, like I said, we were babes in the woods. We'd never seen two guys holding hands on the sidewalk or two guys kiss each other before one of them got on the bus with us. We'd never seen anything like that. And I said to my brother, who would ever hire a girl through a paper like this and have her come over to your house? Because surely you wouldn't tell your neighbor, I got some strange girl from a newspaper coming over to my house. You wouldn't tell anybody. I mean, how would you know who was coming over? It could definitely be some axe-wielding, chainsaw-wielding maniac, and you would never have told anybody you were going to do this. I mean, who knows? And I said, Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers was a safe sex message film. I mean, be careful. I mean, seriously, be careful, because that's exactly what happens in that movie. These guys hook up with these girls. They have no idea who they are, and they turn out to be chainsaw worshiping lunatics. I say
there you go. So you're not a Schlockmeister because there are serious messages. I want to ask you about your movie Scalps, which was one of the top 50 box office hits in 1983. There's a rape scene in the film, which you added at the request of the distribution company. How did that feel to have to add a scene that wasn't part of your original vision?
You know what? I personally felt horrible. And I've had very strong feelings in all of my films. And if you look at them, I hate drug use in our films. I always, like in Commando Squad, they open a suitcase and it's supposed to be like packs of cocaine. And I said, whatever happened to the briefcase full of bundles of money? I said, what's wrong with that? I said, I hate this stuff. I said, I hate bundles of cocaine and drugs in movies. And I know I sound old fashioned, but yeah, I am. And I mean, I hate violence toward women. And I hate that scene because that actress Carol Sue Flockhart, she was way too convincing. You know, it just, we all hated doing it. And I don't think I've ever had a scene like that in another film. And it was the only time I think we've ever had anything like that in a film. And we hated doing it. And I don't think there's anything like that in any other film we've ever done. Most of our films, the women have always been very empowered. And you've always had to you really had to watch out for them in our other films. But I didn't like it, and it really bothered me. That movie is very popular, and it really bothered me later that the biggest part of the fan base was that people liked seeing this girl being chased down, raped, and then her scalp being removed. And I thought, you know what? That says a lot about our audience. And I mean, I'm not trying to be judgmental. I mean, I made this film, but it did kind of, it was a little unnerving for me to start thinking about, you know, why people liked it. I mean, it's like the film, there's something about this film, Harvey, that I can't put my finger on. Some people say it's the musical score. When we did it, there was a feeling like that I went trying to do, because it all took place outdoors. And I said at the time, and it was very lofty of me to say this because I had no money and very little experience, but I said, the thing I wanted to try to do was create a feeling of claustrophobia in a wide open space. That was my initial thing. And when I tried to do that, I was like, if you see the pickup truck at the beginning, it drives down through these little gullies where the walls of the canyon are very close. The road goes right through these very tight spots. And I was trying to see if we could not create some kind of sense of claustrophobia outdoors. But there's something about the film that unnerves people. And I think maybe it's the droning soundtrack or the desert or what it is. But there is something about the film that bothers people. But who knows? It's very crudely made, and it's very amateurishly made. But it does have some kind of a weird effect on people.
No, that's for sure. Now, of course, I have to ask you about John and David Carradine. You made a lot of movies with John: The Tomb, Star Slammer, Death Farm, Evil Spawn, and David appeared in Armed Response, Warlords, Evil Toons, and I'm sure there are more movies that I'm forgetting. Tell me about your friendship with the Carradines.
Well, you know, I met John Carradine on a movie called Shockwaves in Florida in 1975. I went down there to be the still photographer on this movie about these Nazi zombies that rose up out of the ocean. And Peter Cushing was in this film as well. And nobody there knew who these guys were. And I asked the producers, I said, what do you know about these guys? Why'd you hire? And they said, well, we don't know who they are, but these agents told us these were good names for a horror film. And I said, so I was like the only person who knew who Peter Cushing and John Carradine were. So I kind of had carte blanche access to these guys because no one had a question for them. So I hung out, and my now adopted father, Doug Hobart, he knew John Carradine. And so he came down and hung out. And I was, as a still photographer, of course, I had access to photograph these guys. And so I hung around Carradine and I asked him tons of questions. I had all kinds of questions. I was an endless font of questions. And I thought he was on his last legs then. This was 1975. I was doing The Tomb, and it was kind of like it was almost a spoof of like mummy movies, and it made sense. And we were trying to accumulate some kind of names for the film, and we were looking. I wanted Aldo Ray, but he was hard to find because he was kind of like a fringe kind of character at this point. But we got Cameron Mitchell, and we'd gotten Sybil Danning, and we wanted John Carradine, and I don't know how we met Gail Jensen, but she was the future Mrs. David Carradine. And she said, come on over here and to David's place, which was like you won't believe this, but it was like a Japanese tea house or something up off Woodrow Wilson Drive. It had like a koi ponds and the paper windows like you see in You Only Live Twice, where Charles Gray gets the knife through the paper wall. And that's where her David with the grass mats and the whole bit. I went over there and I met them, and she said she could make a deal for John, and we made the deal, and it was great. And I went and there was a very, very complicated, I think it's in my book, but it was very complicated, probably more time than you want to devote here. But I picked up John myself so I could talk to him a little bit before the shoot. And it was a great experience. And I got to know him, so I was able to then call him in the future and set up another shoot where I worked with him a little bit. And I got to know Gail. And then we made Armed Response, because the Toon was this huge hit. It was this monster hit for the company. And the Israeli company, Transworld Entertainment, they didn't like it. It was a big moneymaker, but they thought I had a strange sense of humor about me that they didn't work for them. So even though they made a ton of money, they kind of cut ties with me. But Cinetel, their partner, said, well, if you don't want him, we'll take him. So they came to me and said, hey, you want to make an action film? And I said, yeah. So we went to make an action film with RCA Columbia. And they said, look, let's get David Carradine. So they got David Carradine. And then they said, hey, let's get Lee Van Cleef to play his father. And I said, okay. And then the budget just kept growing and growing and growing. And I ended up with this great movie called Armed Response, which opened in a theatrical release of 100 theaters in New York City. And I mean, I was on my way. At that point, my career was set.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And there's no question that the Carradines, both father and son, played quite a role in that. I also want to ask you about Margot Hemingway. You directed her in Inner Sanctum and the sequel, Inner Sanctum 2. She committed suicide not long after you filmed the sequel. Did you get to know her at all?
Margot was very sweet on me. She was.
Are you saying she was in love with you?
No, she was. What's the word for it?
Did she have a crush on you?
Yes. And
did you feel that way about her?
Well, she was hard to know. You know what I'm saying? She was a person who was very unhappy. And
did you ever figure out why?
I would talk to her a lot, and she was very depressed. And she was like in ashrams and stuff, you know what I mean? And I would say sometimes, and I remember saying to her, why are you so unhappy? And she'd say, well, what do you expect from somebody whose father named you after his favorite wine? And she,
that's really very sad. Really sad.
Yeah. And it was like, there isn't really a lot I really want to say.
I understand. It's just very, very sad. Because you're the last person that worked with her, one of the very last people that worked with her.
Yeah. No, there's not really a lot I really want to, I didn't really want to comment on all that.
Now, in 1987, you made a really fun movie, I thought, called Cyclone. It was starring Heather Thomas. And when the movie came out, I remember seeing her on the David Letterman show, and she trashed the movie. Do you know why?
You know what? That was hilarious. She was such a strange cat. They have most of these people, when you hire them, there's two paychecks. There's one they get paid for the movie. And then there's a separate fee that doesn't like necessarily run through the Screen Actors Guild. And it's a publicity fee, but it's factored into it's factored into the deal, but it gets taxed or charged or whatever you want to call it, what the guild gets to tap into. And but it's overall, but it's a way for them to skirt around certain things, you know. So you get this PR fee, and they generally don't expect to have to do it. Like David Carradine had it on Armed Response, but I don't think anybody ever called him to go do it. But she got called. She got called to go and be on the Letterman show, and I don't think she was ever expected to have to actually go do anything, right? And then she goes on there, and I don't understand what the deal was. I remember she said that the best part of the movie was, or whatever, she got to spit on Martin Landau's hand. And the company was furious. They were furious. And it's like, part of the problem was that they hired a girl named Ashley Ferrara who was blonde. She was blonde, and Heather was out of her mind. And she came up and she said, let me tell you something. She goes, you don't ever hire another blonde opposite a blonde in a movie. And I said, what are you looking at me for? I said, I got no say in any of this. I got nothing to do with this. And there was this animosity between these two girls. I mean, this fight scene at the end of the movie, if you've ever seen this, where they're swinging at each other, each girl claimed the other girl was hitting her in the jaw. And then Heather finally said, if she clips me one more time, it's on. And I kept saying, look, I don't see it. I just don't see it. I said, could you two just stay apart from each other, stay away from each other? And she kept claiming that this girl, Ashley, kept clipping her in the chin. And it was like, it was just going on and on. As you see that fight, there was a book called Female Fights in the Cinema. And this was like the #5 top female fight of all time on film, where these two girls going on. And you look at this on film, and it was there. The haymakers were flying. And I don't know why she did this, but I think she was mad because this fee that you get for publicity was considered to be a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You know, you just put it in your back pocket and you walk. And I think she was upset that she got called to actually do something for the money.
Well, it's the height of unprofessionalism. If you make a movie, whether you're paid or not, you should assist in the promotion of that film. And it really, even though I wasn't in the business at the time, I remember thinking she's not being very professional. Now, I have to ask you, Fred, about Operation Cobra, because there's a scene where you stood in for Don Wilson and you allowed a real live cobra to crawl all over you in bed. How in the world did you manage to keep your cool during that scene?
You know, I always said I would never ask an actor to do anything I wouldn't do myself. And that was one of those moments where you're there, and I don't know what the hell I was thinking, Harvey. I mean, I seriously, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I mean, it was like I didn't expect it to go under the sheet. I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, I stuck my hand in that cage with those two Eastern Diamondback rattlesnakes that one day. And I said I would never do that again. Of course, I always end up doing it again, but that was crazy.
Well, talk about being devoted to your craft. I couldn't believe it when I read that in your book. Now, I've always been curious why some of your movies, like Deep Space, went direct to video instead of having a theatrical release. How do producers decide which movies get a theatrical release and which ones don't?
Well, you know, it's funny because that came right after Commando Squad, which had a $900,000 budget, but I pulled it in at $750,000. And then Gary Graver took the leftover money and made Moon and Scorpio with it. But Deep Space had like $1.5, $1.7 million budget. But the thing was that Transworld was on the ropes when Deep Space was finished. and they were on their last gasp, and they were on fumes at that point, and they were ready to go under. And I think that was the last gasp for them. And they were just looking to put things out, because to put something out theatrically, like Armed Response with Lee Van Cleef and David Carradine, Armed Response cost like $1 million to make. But Columbia TriStar insisted that Cinetel put $3 million in prints and ads. So a movie that costs $1 million goes out theatrically with a $3 million in prints and ads. It costs 3 times as much as it costs to make to put it into theaters and go across the country. So it had a much bigger investment in the distribution into theaters than it ever did in making the film. So you think about Deep Space, which cost maybe $1.7 million. It would have cost them probably $3 million to put it into theaters. So, and they didn't have it. By the time that movie was ready to be released, Transworld was on the ropes and ready to go under. There was a credit Lyonnaise thing. I mean, it came up later too, in some kind of new iteration when I was doing Possessed by the Night or Inner Sanctum 2 or something. I walked into the lobby of the new iteration, which had Mark Damon, if you remember him, and Moishe Dimont or Eduardo Sorlui. They had like armed guards in the lobby there on Ventura Boulevard. When I walked in the lobby, there were people in the lobby to stop those guys from going up that elevator. And it's like, I don't understand. And it's like Credit Lyonnaise had come in and froze off Sarlui and Moishe Dimont and these guys from coming into the building. Now, I mean, I could go up the elevator, but these other guys, they had armed guards to stop them from going up to their own offices. And I'm like going, that's pretty crazy shit.
Yeah, it's clearly a financial decision. Now, Fred, you are widely considered to be the king of the erotic thriller genre, and I believe you were the first person to bring elements of the horror movie genre into the erotic thriller genre. And you wrote in your book that nudity is the cheapest special effect in the movie. So, looking at your body of work, how important has nudity been to the success of your movies?
Well, it's just the fact that I've spread myself over several genres. I used to kid and say that I would go where the paycheck was, because I was a family man. I mean, of course, you can laugh and you can make fun about that, but I put my children's welfare at the forefront of whatever I did. I putting a roof over their head and taking care of them at the forefront. And, if I didn't have a moral objection to a project, I was your guy. And, I grew up in the drive-in. I grew up watching the cheerleaders or night call nurses from Roger Corman. And I was never super opposed to stuff like that. I made Bikini Drive-In, I did that, and I didn't mind.
I think that the really key point, I think, that comes through in your movies is that you always give the characters a motivation for all of the sex they were having.
Well, that was the problem, which is when you were talking about using horror. I did Inner Sanctum, which was really kind of the first thing I did. I did it because I'm not sure if it was Night Eyes or whatever, but these guys came to me, Mark Damon, the star of House of Usher, Vincent Price, and they wanted to tap into Night Eyes, which was a movie with Tanya Roberts, I think, and Andrew Stevens, a very good friend of mine and a guest on your show.
Yes, we loved having Andrew Stevens on the show.
And I said, well, having not done one of these, I said, look, let's go back to the old Lon Chaney movies from the 1940s where they have these mysteries and you could hear what Lon Chaney was thinking, right? So I did a script and you could hear what the heroine, who was in a wheelchair, you could hear her thoughts. And I called it Inner Sanctum, like the Universal films. And it was a monster hit. It made the cover of the Wall Street Journal. It said B movie outperforms A movie or something like that. B movie makes A movie money. It was out renting Backdraft, Ron Howard's movie. And I had a hit. I'd never done it before, never done an erotic thriller before. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But I brought in my horror movie expertise, and I had Margot Hemingway, and Tanya Roberts and Joseph Bottoms. And I applied what I did know to an erotic thriller, which I knew nothing about. And I made this monster hit. $600,000 movie, was out. I was the #1 most rented movie in America. So now we're getting calls to do a sequel and other things. And I said, the problem I had was that, why are these people doing this? I mean, I'd never, I've been in the movie business for a while, and I said, I'd never seen anybody falling in and out of bed with people as fast and for no reason as these people were. I said, maybe we could give them a better reason, maybe something supernatural. And so I came up with this idea in Possessed by the Night that there'd be some weird thing in a jar that they bought in an antique store, some kind of sideshow attraction that was some blob of some sort with an eye in it or something. But there was something otherworldly. And then I could explain why these people were doing things that you just normally wouldn't do. And it worked out great. And it just turned into a bloodbath. I don't know if you saw Possessed by the Night, but everybody ends up dead. They're shooting each other left and right. I mean, I loaded Shannon Tweed up with more body hits than anybody ever, than the Scarface. And it's Chad McQueen, and he's unloading a gun into Shannon Tweed, and she's unloading a gun into him. And it was great. I had a great time. It was more like a Fred Ray movie with sex scenes, you know what I'm saying? It was wonderful. I just enjoyed myself. And I brought back Turhan Bey, who hadn't made a movie in 45 years. I mean, the guy from the 1940s Universal films who'd had the affair with Lana Turner. I brought Turhan Bey back and put him in the movies. And then he started working again. They used to say, if you wanted to work in films again, I would put you back to work. And I did it. They say I used to cast my films out of the cemetery.
Well, you know what? You had a lot of success doing it, and you gave these people work, and they were good.
Turhan Bey was great, man. Wasn't he great?
Fred, you wrote in your book that we can always tell who you were dating by who appeared in your movies. Was it sometimes challenging to direct a wife or a girlfriend?
You know what? I stand by this. I would never put a girlfriend in a role where she could damage my film. And if you look into these movies, sometimes you would see my girlfriend playing the receptionist with 3 lines. I would never put them in a lead if I didn't think they could handle it. They would sometimes, like Inner Sanctum. I mean, I would say that was Suzanne Agar or Laurie Sherman. You would see them answering the phone in the doctor's office. If I would never put them in a leading role if I thought they weren't right for it. I wouldn't give them a role I thought they weren't right for. But you definitely could see them in the films. You just wouldn't see them maybe in a big part. So.
Gee, I wish I had dated you. I might have ended up in the movies. So, Fred, when you started out as a filmmaker, you wanted to direct horror and sci-fi films, but over time, you've moved into many other genres, including action films, holiday films, even romantic comedies. Did you diversify out of desire or necessity?
I found out very quickly that there was no future in pigeonholing myself. I mean, after I did... when I started out independently, I was like starting my own projects, you know what I mean? I did, the films I raised my own money for were like Scalps and Biohazard and, maybe the Tomb. But the very next film, Star Slammer, the next film I was offered was Armed Response, an action film. I made that film. It was a huge success. So the next film they offered me was Cyclone. Well, I was immediately out of horror and sci-fi. And I realized that it was over. And I needed to go where the paycheck led me. And so if it was children's films or romantic comedy or Christmas or Women in Peril for Lifetime, I decided that my best bet was to tell the best story I could with a camera and don't think of myself as a master of any genre. I don't really believe that I've ever really made a good horror film. I don't think that, because there are people who make horror films and they're 100 times better than I ever did. I mean, I like horror films, but I don't know that I was ever actually really a good horror film maker.
Well, you're very gifted that you can work in so many genres and that you are able to reinvent yourself within the industry so well. Now, of course, Fred, you are not going to be surprised when I tell you that you are considered an icon in the gay world because you produced Dante's Cove, which is a terrific gay miniseries. And then, as you mentioned earlier, you wrote, produced, and directed 28 episodes of The Lair. My question is, do you know why The Lair ended after only 3 seasons?
Well, yeah, I do. And because every once in a while somebody will come up to me at a convention and they'll say, "Oh my God, why did you do what you did?" And I said, I ended the season 3 because I fully believed there was a season 4. I had great plans. I always tried to end a season with a bunch of cliffhangers because I had plans for where I was going in the future. I mean, I fully had ideas of where season 4 was going. It was an interesting situation because I was at a place called Here TV. And Here TV had a sort of a TV network, but they were mostly these movies. And I made a series of what they called dual purpose films. And they were action or disaster films. And I made 2 versions. I made one version in which the lead characters were gay, and then I would film the same scenes a second time in which the lead characters were best friends. And these films are available on Tubi. I'm not sure which version is available on Tubi, but they're on Tubi now. You can watch these films that I made on Tubi. And I made maybe 4 of them. Maybe more. And it was a series of feature films called Everyday Gay Heroes. And they were mostly disaster films, earthquake films, solar storm, type of films. And they would play them on Here TV. And I said to the Paul Collegeman and them, I said, the problem with Here TV is you don't have enough product. I said, anybody who subscribes to your network is going to see the same things just repeated. I said, you need a filler. I said, you need some kind of half-hour show or something. You need something to break things up. And I said, I used to produce for Cinemax, I said, these bikini movies, and we made them very cheaply, and they were made very quickly, and they cost almost nothing. I said, you should let me make something for you in that budget range. We could knock this stuff out very cheaply, and it would give you a half-hour, multiple half hours here and there. And they said, what are you thinking? I said, I'll make you a Gay Dark Shadows. And we'll make it for the price of like a bikini movies and blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, come at us with this. And I did. And I said, look, I'll make you a 6-hour episode, 6 half-hour episodes for a ridiculous price. It was like $60,000. And they said, okay, all we want is you to hit this. And so the first 6 episodes were done for $60,000. And they were, if you saw them, they were very rudimentary. They were just sort of the setup. It was like vampires and a Dorian Gray painting and some kind of a silly flashback to the 1800s, which I'm a little embarrassed about, but I tried. And amazingly enough, because, Dante's Cove was a very... they called that the jewel in the crown. It was IA, it was in Hawaii, it was a lot of money. But it was The Lair the lair got a certain amount of attention because it was a little grittier and it was a little more bass. And everybody kind of went, "Ooh, look at that." And so they said, "Well, why don't we'll do 9 episodes. We'll give you a little bit more money." And I said, "Oh, okay." So then I went for like a werewolf, and I had a plant that only bloomed under a moonlight, and all of that. So it went on, and then the next, then they went, "Well, let's do 13, and we'll go up to this amount of money." But then all of a sudden, the company ran afoul of Merrill Lynch, who was they had a loan situation with him. Merrill Lynch came in and they foreclosed on the company. And so the whole company was thrown into turmoil and everything was canceled. And the rug was pulled out right underneath us. And we weren't able to go forward on season 4, which we had plans for. We were going to do a Frankenstein, which I thought would have been very interesting, and voodoo. We were going to bring in voodoo to resurrect the Damien, and they were going to build a body, and it was going to be pretty interesting, but it didn't happen, and I was very disappointed because I did leave people hanging, but that's what cliffhangers are. So there you go.
So if someone comes up with the money, would you do it? A season 4?
I would think about it, but you know what, though? They did resurrect the lair. I didn't get to see any of the episodes. No one consulted me or asked me about it. I simply read about it online. They reimagined it, as they like to say, and I'm not sure what it's like, but I think there is another lair out there somewhere. I think it did get refilmed and new characters and stuff like that.
I didn't know that. Now, of course, Fred, I have to ask you about Abner the Invisible Dog, because you got to direct Jane Keane, who played Art Carney's wife, Trixie, in The Honeymooners. Tell me about your time with her.
You know what? When I was doing that film, I had a choice. It was either Jackie Joseph from the original Little Shop of Horrors or Jane Keane. And I trust me, I labored on this. And I finally said, I got to have Trixie. And so she lived in Toluca Lake, and she had like it wasn't a townhouse, but it was a big apartment. She had a whole room devoted to herself. It was like a museum to Jane Keane. It was tremendous. All the awards, all the photos, all the whatever it is you ever wanted to know about Jane Keane was in this room. I just loved Jane Keane. I was so enamored with her. I was just so, and I couldn't have been happier. And we had such a great time. And so sadly, she passed away before the film was completed. And she didn't get to go to the screening. She passed away before the film completed post. I mean, she lived through the filming, but she didn't live through the completion of the film itself.
But you got to make her last movie, and thank you for giving her that last chance to be seen on screen.
I was heartbroken. Well, I made Marie Windsor's last film as well, and I was, and I worked with Marion Ross from Happy Days, which was surely one of the strangest stories. I didn't tell it in my book because it was so complicated. I attacked the Marion Ross story from A Perfect Christmas List because it was so complicated. I didn't know how to tell it.
What was so complicated about it?
Well, I went into this movie and I would hired Shirley Jones. Right before we were to film the scene, to start the film, Shirley Jones got food poisoning. And they said, Fred, she can't work tomorrow, her first day, but she'll be well in about 3 days. So what can you do? I said, well, I'm going to film the outside of this hospital scene where the family comes up, which was Richard Karn from Home Improvement and the rest of them. And I said, they're supposed to wheel her out of this hospital, put her in the car, and then there's a big scene there of the whole family, and then take her home. I said, well, how about I'll do this? Since she'll be well in 3 days. I said, I'll get a double. and I'll put a Shirley Jones wig on her. And I'll shoot a wide shot from the back, from a distance of the hospital, and they'll bring the whole family, will bring the double out in a wheelchair with a Shirley Jones wig on her. And instead of filming the whole scene, they'll put her in the back seat of the car, and then the family will do the scene, and then we'll do the coverage of all the other actors. And then later, 3 days later, we'll take the real Shirley Jones and put her in the backseat of the car in the driveway of the house miles away, and we'll just shoot through the window. We'll do Shirley Jones's coverage and cut it into the scene. We'll do it in the driveway of the house in another location. And they said, great. So I got a woman who kind of looked like Shirley Jones, put a wig on her, and we did a big wide shot, and they bring her out, and they put the double into the backseat of the car. And then I jumped in and I did close-ups of all the people standing outside of the car, and figured that later, a few days later, when Shirley was well, I would then shoot Shirley in the back of the car, and I'd just look through the window and shoot her close-ups and cut them in with the stuff I did at the hospital. So a couple days later, they said, Shirley's not well, and she's just not going to be able to do the show at all. And I went, oh, great. Well, now what do I do? I filmed this Shirley Jones double, and she's in the backseat of the car. What do I do? They said, Fred, we're going to hire Marion Ross from Happy Days. I said, oh, okay, good, okay. So she's got to wear a Shirley Jones wig through the whole movie because I already shot this double coming out of the hospital. So they said, oh, okay. So they got Marion Ross and they put a Shirley Jones wig on her. I put her in the backseat of the car, shot her in the driveway. But Marion Ross was like well into her 90s, I would guess. And she just dropped in at the last moment, and she was totally not up to dropping in at the last moment into this role. And she was trying to use cue cards, and at the end of her first day, she wanted to quit. And I had to go up to the room and say, I know you can do this. It's just, I know it's the last moment. I'll work with you. I'll make this as easy as possible. I'll shoot everybody's coverage first. I'll make sure you're last. She goes, well, I don't want to use cue cards because I'm embarrassed. I said, well, I'll do everything I can. I'll put everything on the table in front of you so we won't hold up any cards. And I kind of massaged her, and God bless her. I did get through it, but it was like one of the weirdest things I've ever been involved with. It was very strange. But I did get to go out to Marion Ross's house to do a wildline with her, and it was called Happy Days Ranch.
Oh,
And
that's so sweet.
And she lived there by herself. I was stunned.
Well, we had
in this big place.
we had her son Jim Meskimen on the show, and she's still with us. And God bless you for accommodating her the way you did. So, Fred, you were once told by producer Alan Emile that you're the kind of guy who would walk out of a cave with an armful of diamonds and drop them all trying to pick up one more. What do you think he meant by that?
I know exactly what he meant by that, and he's right.
Was he saying that in wanting too much, you end up with nothing?
You know, what he meant was that I was the kind of guy that if you, on the last day of a show, if I walked into a studio and you had spent $20,000 to build this grand set, and it was the last day of the show, and all I had to do was shoot this one last scene on this grand set, my mind would immediately tell me to go to the studio and say, I want to rent this stage tomorrow. Don't tear that set down. I'll think of something else to shoot. And that was me. I would walk in and I would look at the set and I'd say, this is tremendous. Don't tear it down. I'll think of something else to shoot. I'll be back tomorrow. And that was what Alan was saying to me, that I wouldn't be satisfied to just come in and shoot that last day's set, that scene, and walk away. And that was me. And I did that a million times. I came in on Commando Squad, and there was a Quonset set where they were torturing Brian Thompson, Bill Smith, and Sid Haig and them. And I looked at that set and I said, this is a tremendous set. And it was the last day of the show. And there was like 2 days in there. And I went home that night and I wrote 8 pages of The Phantom Empire, and I the next day I went around the crew and I said, listen, when this show wraps tonight, I said, go out and have a beer. I said, and as soon as Alan leaves, I said, come back in. I said, I'll give everybody $50 or $100 or whatever. I said, we're going to shoot another scene for some other movie. And they did. And I got Russ Tamblyn and those guys, and we ran back in there and we shot another scene for a completely different movie that turned out to be The Phantom Empire. And I mean, yeah. I mean, but that's what Roger Corman would do.
I really think you're amazing because you seem to be able to make something good often out of nothing or very little. Well, I only have one more question for you, Fred, and it's this. You said in your book that you don't think you're special. But Fred, just sit back for a moment and listen to some of the things you've done besides making hundreds of movies. You operated a carnival freak show. You were a professional wrestler known as Fabulous Freddie Valentine, and you even wrestled a 9-foot alligator. You've put your hand in a tank filled with live rattlesnakes. You allowed a live cobra to slither over your manhood, and at one point, you had 2 4-pound giant African rats living in your bathroom. And let's not forget that in 2017, you received a Living Legend Award at the Buffalo Dreams Fantastic Film Festival. And Fred, I'm just scratching the surface. So let me ask you, do you not think all of that makes you extraordinarily special?
No. My biggest accomplishment in life are my 4 sons. And now I'm a granddad, and that's the best part of it all. I waited forever to be a grandfather. And that's the best part of it all. I mean, I waited decades to be a granddad. And that's the best part of it all.
Well, you certainly have your priorities screwed on right. You certainly know what really matters in life. But I have to tell you, it's been such a pleasure meeting you and having this chance to celebrate your amazing life and career. Thank you for all the great movies. Thank you for writing your memoir. Most of all, thank you for taking the time to appear on our show, Fred.
Well, thanks for asking me. I mean, I've been looking forward to this because generally I get asked to do a lot of horror stuff, and people don't realize that I do a lot of Christmas movies. You know, I haven't made a horror film since, God, I don't know, maybe Piranha Women, but I did that as a laugh.
Well, thank you again. Our guest has been the renowned filmmaker and director Fred Olen Ray, whose latest book, Hellbent for Hollywood, A Director's Journey, is available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. You can follow Mr. Ray on his official Facebook page, which is now showing on your screen. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.